about care of the heart space, but there's something critical here, or to do with vocation and your life.
Yeah.
What on earth do you mean by care of the heart space?
It's a good question, because it sounds very woolly, and in a sense it is, because it's very difficult to explain. What I mean, I think, is this word care. It's bandied about an awful lot, and it's used in very serious contexts. The care of our common home, the care of the earth, the care of communities. And yet we're in situations where it seems almost impossible to care. Well, it's very difficult. It's an overwhelming thing often. How do we care? And I've put heart space because for me that seems to be a sort of overlapping image. It's not just an individual thing, but it is an individual thing. This care of one's heart, the care of one's vocation. What am I here to do? What am I here to be? And that heart space being the space of God, not just for myself, but for others. So that's why I think the care of the heart space, this vocation that we all have in different forms, is so critical. And that's why it's so important. How do we express it? How can we think of it? And how do we actively express this? How do we do it? And I suppose it came out of a lot of things, a lot of biblical imagery and Christian wisdom, ancient Christian wisdom, and a lot about Mary, Mary, the Mother of God, and her radical yes to God, but also how that yes, how, if you say yes to God, how does that play out? What does that mean? Further down the line, how do you continue saying yes? And Mary's pondering when, in the biblical story, the account of finding Jesus in the temple, it was said that Mary pondered all these things in her heart. And the Greek for that, all these things, was about the active things of God. So she was pondering in her heart. And I think she was pondering constantly in her heart, not in a navel-gazing way at all, but in a way that was giving her direction to be a disciple. So basically, that's what I would like to do. So it's a question, how do I do it? So that's sort of where it came from, a lot of the care of the heart space.
Is there a sense in which if you don't find your vocation, you're abusing your heart space? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, I think it's a bit difficult. This word vocation, I think, is really quite difficult, because sometimes in the church it's only used in a very limited sense, and I would use it in a wide sense, because everybody has a vocation and a situation that they're in life, and knowing that is really important. And I think it's also discerning how to live it is important. So it's not just that I said, yes, I want to be a Carmelite sister, that is my vocation, but stop. It's much more than that. I think each of us lives a vocation, and if we are able to live it deeply, then we are living out who we are. That's the end of our being.
How do I find out what my vocation is?
I think by prayer, by listening, and working out where you are now. It's listening to those deep places, but who are you? Where and what brings you life? What brings you alive? And I think it's that being brought to life, that's where God is speaking, in the liveness.
That sounds really profound.
Well, some people, you know, I mean, some people are brought alive in their work, and that's part of their vocation. Some people need to do a job, but that might sustain them in another area of their life. But it is about just sort of knowing what I really do think what brings you alive.
In a sense, is it like in my life sometimes I'm so driven by what I've been told I've got to be, what my parents tell me I've got to do, what my family, work, whatever. Are you saying you can sort of bulldoze what your heart's telling you are? Is that what you mean?
I think it's really difficult, because people have expectations. I think all through life people have expectations, or you're being told certain things, you're given certain images. You know, being a Christian, being a person of faith, it has a certain image. But your heart space, what your heart tells you, what brings you to life, if that's in conflict with what some other part of you is saying, that takes a lot of chewing over, praying over, sometimes conflict. But it's about being your deeper self. So it's not about what somebody else thinks you should be, or even, you know, like you say, what you think you might have to be, because these things have come in, and maybe I've accepted certain things uncritically, and then comes a point where it's like, hang on, something's awry here.
So give me a practical example. How do I listen to my heart and hear what brings me alive practically?
It's there's one thing that I like. It depends on what your experience is, because when you're in the middle of it, I think it's really hard to discern it, because there's that biblical passage, you know, God says, choose life, not death, and you sort of think, well, you know what life is and you know what death is, but in the middle of crisis and chaos, sometimes you don't actually know. It's very difficult to work that out. So sometimes if you've been in that experience before, then you can think back and have an idea of what it felt like to choose life. Sometimes it's a very frightening place to be, and sometimes you've got to work out, well, is this fear that I've got to confront, is it real or not? Sometimes, practically speaking, a lot of times it helps to speak to somebody who has some knowledge or experience of it, or who knows you very well.
So is there a sense you're saying that I can maybe start to know it, but I'm being held off from doing what I need to do, what I'm made for, what makes me come alive?
I think there's a lot of blockages, and I think there's an awful lot of things. I feel that there's a lot of things at the moment that choke us from, that stop us from being really alive. Yeah.
You got some examples or any way of illustrating that?
In terms of discernment, sorry, Staffan, can you repeat?
No, I'm just trying to say there are things that get in the way, and maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talked earlier, you did talk about the Noonday Devil. Would maybe you want to sort of explain some of that? That was fascinating.
It's a really, I find it it's strange. It's a strange image, and it comes from the desert fathers and mothers, ancient Christian wisdom, which some people may be familiar with, some of you may not. And they went out into the desert on this spiritual quest, the deserts around Egypt, and they fought demons. That's how they described it, or that's how the people who wrote about them described it. They left sayings, the desert father and mother sayings. And one of the things that they found was that they talked about the Noonday Devil. And the Noonday Devil is a sort of strange beast because it has a sort of almost contradictory way of acting. And what they say is that it will suck you of joy, and you become despondent and dispirited and discouraged. That's one aspect of the Noonday Devil. And I think that's certainly something that we've got in the world today, and people have been writing about the Noonday Devil and how much it's a demon of our times. You know, think of it in a psychological or spiritual or however, you know, metaphorical way, but certainly this despondency and difficulty of you know, sort of like walking through treacle to get anywhere, you know, is a real sucking you of energy and sucking you dry. And then the other side of that, the other side of the Noonday Devil is sort of really restless, random activity. So people can seem very busy and can be very busy, but the busyness isn't actually focused and grounded. And so the busyness doesn't actually achieve anything, or it doesn't achieve the goal. And so I find that really interesting in our contemporary context. So to be grounded in ourselves and facing these demons and discerning these things that are around us in order to be focused, but focused with that ease, if that's, you know, the sort of other faiths talk about living in ease. It's not sort of a lazy relax, but there's a relaxed sort of ability to move forward and to focus. That's that relaxed, focused attention on what needs to be done, what needs to be the next thing to do, rather than a lot of busyness or exhaustion.
So I'm hearing that, you know, there's a sort of to care for who I am and what I'm about, I need to find out how much heart space I need to find out what I'm made for and my purpose in life.
Yeah.
And I've heard something there about discernment. I've also heard something about the fact that a whole bunch of stuff gets in the way.
Yes.
And that's what you call the Noonday Devil.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of activity gets away from being Staffan being Staffan and Zoe being Zoe.
Yes, and it's that sort of that being who you are. It basically that's what God has made us to be, and it's the Zoe-ness that needs to come out. It's the Staffan-ness that needs to come out. It's the who, you know, that core of our being that we need to act from and be grounded in. And it's that we often, I think, get sort of pushed away from.
Mm. Now, you gave a really interesting example when we chatted earlier, because, you know, people talk about Mary and Martha, and obviously Mary's the goody and Martha's the baddie, and you started talking about Martha as the goody. Sorry to be very simplistic.
Yeah, but that's how it comes out, isn't it? And I really like Martha. I think she's a really maligned person, and she's. I sort of have her as a bit of a hero, really, of mine. And she's a good woman to have by your side, I think. So yeah, look at Martha, and she's the one who's distracted, you know, the typical thing, like you say, you know, she's the baddie because she's the one that's distracted by all her cares. So this double-edged thing about caring and cares. So it's the cares of anxieties. And often that's that's the story that we hear. But in John's Gospel, you've got a different presentation of her. She's the one who, in John's Gospel, when Lazarus is dead and Jesus comes to Bethany, it's Martha who goes out to meet Jesus. And I really like that image of her going, he's coming to them, but she's going out to meet him. And then there's that interaction, and I feel that interaction is almost like Mary, Mother of God at Cana, because sort of on that very, on really quite a human level, a good relatedness. Martha's saying, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. So she's questioning, she's wanting to know. She's not being a sop. She's engaging. And then she makes her profession of faith. And we hear about Peter's profession of faith very often, but Martha also says, you are the Son of God. I believe in you. So she makes a profession of faith. So from this person who's been distracted by their cares and their anxieties, she is also, or becomes, this person who can make that profession of faith in that very strong way. And I like that transition. And I also like the legends that have grown up around her. And although they're not canonical, they're not in the Bible, but the storytelling around her, I think is lovely. And there's two pictures of Martha that I really, really like. So maybe we could have those, and I'll just tell you about this legend. And there's different versions of this legend, but basically it's one of these legends where Martha gets into a boat and magically or mysteriously sort of ends up in Europe, and there's different locations that she ends up, but the story basically goes that she goes to a community and they are threatened by a dragon, and this dragon is eating the inhabitants, and it's Martha who defeats the dragon. And I rather like these sort of medieval sort of depictions of it. I think it feels sort of, there's a bit of fun in there, really. But I like the story of that, sort of defeating the dragon, this demon. And I think it's a bit difficult to see, but these pictures as well, she has keys. And the reason that she has keys is that it's the keys of the household. It's the household management. And that's where the Greek root of economists come from. So I think she's a good woman to have around at this point in time. It's God's economy, God's household. And she's often sort of seen having this dragon on a lead. She tames the dragon. She either kills the dragon or she puts it on a lead and tames it. And I rather like that sort of imagery as well, because it seems to me like the energies of the Noonday Devil, the Noonday Demon, that can suck you dry or send you into sort of frantic activity. And yet, if you face those demons, I think there's energy release. Energy so on your side as opposed to being against you.
So there's this woman who is known for having all these cares and being distracted. The imagery here is about how she's tamed and enabled those to get through those and focus and find her real purpose. Is that what it's saying, or am I being simplistic?
That's how I interpret it. Yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked about discernment. That's really a clear key issue, and shortly I think we should begin to open up for a discussion and let people talk and ask you themselves their views. But you talked about the sort of the Carmelite order and the whole contemplative life, and you've also talked a lot about action and being involved with a number of active things that go. How does this all work? You know, your vocation, contemplation, action. Can you give some advice?
I think I just find it very difficult when the image is either purely active or purely contemplative, because I think you can't do that. I think it has to be some form of contemplative action, and how that happens in a person is, I think, is about that person, that particular particularity of that person. But I don't think, you can't separate the two. There has to be some sort of union in that. So even if you are predominantly active at some point, there's got to be some sort of contemplative or core grounding in some way, and sort of vice versa. So I think for far too long, like you say, the Martha Mary image has been too separated. We all need both. We need, a person comprises of both, and at different parts of our lives, I think perhaps in different circumstances, we enact that differently.
Okay, you've talked about the vision and the discernment, and we'll break out shortly to hear others' views. But can you give us some guidance on the practical action in taking this forward? What would your core advice be in terms of acting out that vocation?
I can only say that there's times that I think there's times that you're on the right path, and the whole thing of sort of like peace in terms of discernment, does this bring you peace, is one that I think you have to be very careful about, because the peace that you have doesn't necessarily mean that it's peaceful. I think we are in a desert at the moment. We're just talking about desert mothers and fathers, and there is this sense that the world is a desert or becoming so, and there's that double. It's always an odd thing because the words can mean both. It can mean two things. Ancient Roman said that Rome marched into an area, laid it waste, and called it peace. So I think that there's a false peace, but if you're on the right track, I feel that there is a peace that that you're doing the right thing, that you have to keep discerning. But there's a phrase that I rather like, again, ancient Christian writing, and it's about quietude. So it's about having energy in that peace. So I don't know if that I don't know if that helps, because I think it is a question of experience, but it's also helping each other as well. I think the care of the heart space is something that that we're not necessarily very good at. And in terms of institutional church, sometimes it can be quite difficult.
I have a spiritual director who, if I'm trying to work through something, he will ask me, he will basically probe where my heart is pointing. In a way, sometimes I can get really excited about something and really feel good about it, but actually my peace is because it's going to make Staffan look good. And he will really test with me whether actually this is driven by where our Father wants to take us, and or by Staffan, and that's really helpful. Before we open up and just ask people to contribute, is there anything you want to finish with?
Right now, I think I'd just like to see if anything has resonated with anybody, or whether, whether there's things that people would like to talk about from that.
Why don't we do that? I mean, Ruth, are you okay to be the in control of all this and letting people in and out? That would be really great. We've got 2 screens, so you might have to hop about a bit, or I might have to. Just to let you know, those who've come late, we are recording this, so we can share this later. Why don't we ask just people to put hands in the air and say if they'd like to reflect on what they've heard or give some feedback. Okay, is that B that I saw there? Did you no, you didn't? Okay, it's Julie.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Zoe, thank you for all that. I'm not sure what my question is, but I want to try and relate all that you've said specifically to how can I live well and green? What's my particular vocation now in the face of climate crisis? I think that's what I'm exploring personally at the moment. So can you or anybody else throw in some ideas? I think I'm sometimes torn between just getting on with living the simple life, growing my vegetables and not flying anywhere, and needing perhaps to be more active, to campaign or so on. But I don't think I'm a campaigner. That is. Is it enough? I suppose, is it enough just to tend my plot? That's maybe that's my question.
Great question, Zoe.
Well, I mean, if you're not a campaigner, don't campaign. But maybe, maybe there are things that you can do without sort of taking you away from the core person that you are. I don't know. Maybe, just sort of signing a petition now and again is fine. Perhaps supporting others who do. I don't know. But I do think, it is a case of not being pushed to do something that isn't actually you, but at the same time being aware that there are other needs, because we can't do everything, can we? We're not made to do everything. We've actually got to support each other, with what we can do and what we're meant to do.
E.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say to Julie that I think that the food we eat is one of the great violent actions that we take in the world, and that growing our own veg is a non-violent direct action. And that maybe sharing your vegetables with people who never see a vegetable with soil on it is a radical action in the world that we live in, where everything is stripped clean and nobody ever sees any earth on the food that they eat. I think there are things we do that we discount as being hardly anything, but they're so powerful. And food is one of those places where we can really do that. That's it.
Thank you.
It's a really good point. Yeah. And I think that's true. You know, we discount what we do, and we don't have to. You know, if God's asking us to just be and do, you know, what we are and who we are, that's all we need to do.
Alison. We are struggling to get you unmuted, Alison. Oh, here we go.
I found your mention of the Noonday Devil really apposite, because I see in my reactions to the climate crisis both sides of that. And you can despair, or you can get madly active, or for me, I get terrifically worked up and kind of enthusiastic and angry, and then you put people off. And I know that it's not really the helpful thing. And I just found that a really good illustration and explanation. I don't quite know how I fight him, because some of it is inbuilt in your character, isn't it? That you're someone who acts like that. It's just really interesting and something to think about. Thank you.
Great. And then we got Naomi. I understand had a hand up.
There we go. Slow with the technology. Sorry. I think for me, there was something really powerful that Zoe said about that conversation between the two different parts of each of us, between that contemplative side and the active side. And I think the key is
you raise your hand to speak,
that the quietude that we seek comes out of that conversation, and almost for me that sense that care of the heart is giving enough space and time for that internal kind of wrestling and conversation to take place and to then take root, because wherever it takes root there is that kind of real grounded strength of whatever action that you take, whether that is a seemingly large one or a seemingly small one. But I think as soon as we have that kind of, oh, I'm doing this, but should I be doing that? You know, that's when we really need to stop and just give the space for that conversation. And that can take an enormous amount of time, and it can take the quiet of contemplation with ourselves and God, or it can happen in the space with other people as well. But I think kind of needs all of that to happen. And if we just charge off in a direction, I think we don't find the essence of what it is that we really need to respond with.
I think that's absolutely true. Yes, and giving ourselves that space and the time can be quite difficult sometimes. And I think that's why, you know, it's sort of the regenerative culture. It's also got something to do with the sitting in the ashes and the whole, that whole space. And I think also, you know, saying about this sitting in the ashes, I think it's also got to do with ritual in churches as well. We find that space in different places with different people, but it's so vital, because otherwise we just can't be ourselves and we can't be church.
Gina.
Thank you, Zoe. This is very challenging and very quite exciting, really. And yes, this concept of the Noonday Devil is something I can certainly, yeah, I can recognise quite clearly in my life. I think my question is, do you think, as somebody who's been a contemplative in the sense of a Carmelite sister, that this care for your heart space is something that is instinctive, or is it something that you have to actually decide to learn how to do? And I think a corollary of that for me is that this is not meant to be critical, but for an awful lot of people, that space to find that place simply isn't there. I don't know any of the people I work with, for example, who have any place to find that space. So I'm just sort of, how does one,
Yeah.
you know, do you set a space aside, have a spiritual director, have that sort of process, or do you think it is something that spiritually we can develop within ourselves? And is it freely available? I know God is freely available, but is that sort of, is that something that is available really in a real sense to the majority of people?
Wow. Zoe, do you have a comment? And then I'd really like to hear what Andy has to say about that as well, because I know you can.
Okay. I would say that it is. I think it is instinctive, but I also think that you've got to hone it and learn it, because I think it's something in our deepest being, that is built in. It is of God. It's like original blessing, sin didn't come first, it was blessing. So yes, I feel very sure that it's instinctive, but I think that we have to learn it and relearn it, because we are bound to sin. The world is so fast, it's so the expectations, the needs are so great, and yes, getting that space is so hard, and it's an incredible privilege to get that space, and not everybody can. Circumstances are such that some people can't.
Let's go to Andy, and then straight on after that to Stephen. That would be great. Andy.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks, Zoe. I was really intrigued to be reminded about the Noonday Devil and so on, and I hadn't really been thinking about it before. And what I'm wondering about, and it might be a bit of a segue to a session next month, which I'm meant to be leading, is thinking about distinguishing between that and mourning, bereavement.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering whether you can give us a quick pointer on that distinction, if you like, so that we're not trying to deal with mourning, Noonday Devil, when actually our issue is mourning.
Yeah, that's really, really important and very difficult to answer in a sense. But I just off the top of my head, I sort of think that when we've not been given space to mourn and process, I think that's when the Noonday Devil basically is in a place to really maul us.
So mourning can become the noonday, or can be used by the Noonday Devil, if you like.
It can be perverted to be, yes, but it's actual to mourn in the true sense, is part of the process of health.
Yeah, and indeed is blessed.
Yes, yes, very much so. Yes,
Yeah.
strange blessings, but
Yeah,
blessed. Yeah.
Well, Andy, we really look forward to hearing more from that on the 7th of October, sitting among the ashes. If you, so that's the plan. So we'll have another.
There was. I was just going to say that there was the comment in the chat saying we were talking about space, and Rebecca's just put that space can be scary. Just to say, wanted to read that out because it's true.
Let's go to Stephen then. You've been waiting very patiently. Thank you. Stephen Toynbee.
Sorry, Stephen, can you unmute?
Yes, you can hear me now.
Yeah.
So, Zoe, the Noonday Devil I've never heard of, so that's something I've got to sort of dig around and read up on. What I was thinking about and reflecting was this whole aspect of one's heart. If one's heart tries to find something that feeds it each day, as it were, so you look at the world in a different perspective. So everything else might be sort of completely catastrophic around you, but if you just draw one thing out of that day, you're feeding that heart to keep it alive, as it were. So today I've been working in a warehouse with thousands and thousands of parcels. But then I think to myself, well, if that one parcel brings that one person pleasure, that then feeds my heart. And I think that's what each and every one of us in some ways has got to try and live back out again. That it isn't a disaster, it isn't a desert, it's something that you've got to find the joy that's there and go beyond. Otherwise, I think you're just going to get in a very gloomy place.
Yeah, it reminds me, or I'm thinking of the passage in scripture, which I can't quite recall properly, but the one about
well, I'm
basically
just...
sort of saying nourish your heart, nourish you, fill your mind with good, with the good.
Yeah.
But then again, it's a bit of a sort of, it's this double-edged sword, isn't it? It's sort of, it's how you actually do that. So absolutely, yes.
And just, I think really it's just like lifting your head off the ground,
Yeah.
opening it and looking beyond and looking at, taking note, putting it to memory and just recording it.
Yes.
So the call is ultimately to live that life, to live this life, and live this life to the full here and now, this day.
Yes, in this present moment, the sacrament of the present moment.
Yeah,
lifting your heart to God in the present moment.
Yes. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I saw Helen Williams. You had your hand up.
Sorry, having problems unmuting there. I was really interested in what you said, Zoe, about Mary and Martha, because I find in myself a constant battle that I want to be Mary and sit at the feet of Jesus. But every time I do that, he sends me back out to be Martha. And I think there's something that's links with what Julie was saying earlier, kind of how do we do this? And I think there are times and seasons when we have to do different things. There are times when, yes, it's enough to grow our own vegetables and live simply ourselves. And then different seasons in our lives, maybe when family or employment situations change, when we need to be more active. And I think there's something about recognizing where we're called to be and keep on monitoring our heart space as we go through, because our vocation actually changes according to where we are, which is probably why it's important to retreat and be Mary and listen regularly.
Thank you for that. And I think I saw Vanessa.
So I've just been reflecting, it's really interesting, and I've just been reflecting about whether maybe also we're too individualistic about this. So we think of heart space as my little space here. But I wonder whether also we need to think alongside that as heart space is something that we grow together. And I just think, you know, I've been taking part in the Extinction Rebellion space last week, and at the end, and it's really interesting in those rebellions are sort of I feel like a sort of heart space opens up, and it just means you can you can go into really deep conversations. You can go into that sort of heart to heart that you don't normally go into. And it's also made me think about my days in the sort of charismatic movement, where at its best, it felt like there was a sort of shared heart space. And I just wonder if this is something that the Spirit wants to do, but it's not just something we can do by ourselves. Sometimes we approach it a bit too individualistically. And we do need to attend to our hearts, but there's also something where we're not going to get there just as individuals. But this is a communal thing, and we do actually really need each other.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about the Pope's encyclical, he talks about, yes, individual conversion, but he's talking about communal conversion, societal conversion. You know, it can't be simply individuals in that sense. And yeah, I think the Holy Spirit really moves, breathes in places that people come together and are open, and that's community discerning, and that happening of that heart space is just so important. And I sort of think that we just need to get better at it as well, you know, rather than the chance, you know, knowing, I think, that the Holy Spirit wants this of us, not being afraid to do it as a group, with friends, with people we don't know.
But is this part of the whole what makes you come alive process? What Vanessa's saying, there's something happening in you which is saying, yes, this is where I'm made to be.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's the Holy Spirit breathing life in us and through us. Yeah. Peter's just put a comment in the chat, and then I'll go up one. But Peter says, my view is the heart space is our true self we share with everyone and God. To get there, we need to remove things. Remove the clutter of the heart space. Which does bring, yeah, there's that image of heart and heart attacks and clogging of hearts, and yeah, having heart surgery and declogging ourselves so that things can move freely.
And we're back. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say before that, we've got a Gaynor wrote, Zoe, where does this Noonday Devil and mental health issues collide? I have worked in mental health and volunteer with people who are Christians, but really struggle with finding peace and joy. And that's like such a key question. I don't think but a really pertinent question. I mean, I was reading something. I just think it, and I think it's true that so often the label of depression, you know, it's just like the depression, whereas I think, you know, it is about what the Desert Fathers and Mothers would call Noonday Devil, a sort of despondency, which is different. Now, I'm not a professional, so you know, it'd be interesting how other people, you know, professionals thought of that, but there is that, you know, have read that about people sort of saying about these distinctions that aren't always made, and that it's categorized a bit too simplistically, and I think it also goes back with what Andy was saying about mourning and processing grief and so forth, and being healthy, or yeah. So pretty key question, but I'm not quite sure that I can, you know, sort of say too much about it, but I think it's a really important one. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I just look at Stephen again, Stephen Toynbee. No, you're still muted.
Sorry. Can you unmute?
Unmute. It's actually Anthony here. I joined halfway through with listening with Stephen because funnily enough, I've got appointments all around heart and tomorrow for my eyes because my heart failure is affecting my eyes and there's things happening in my eyes. So I was interested to hear Zoe talk about the relationship between the heart and everything that goes on in our human hearts and this heart space as well. But one thing I wanted to say very clearly is somebody, I can't remember who it was, talked about opening our hearts to everybody that were around and with God. I just want to add that actually God's heart opens first. It's already open and waiting for us. And even if there is a Noonday Devil, in whatever form we understand it, God's heart is already open and is open to climate change, is open to COVID and everything that's happening in our world, is open to Black Lives Matter, and it's something that we need to realize because it's not always clear or taught or known that God's heart is open first. And that we don't have to do anything at all to open God's heart. That's already happened in the crucifixion, in the death of God on the cross. I don't know whether it's pertinent, but I will say it, that there is definitely a failure in the English-speaking world, and perhaps whether we're Catholics or non-Catholics or non-believers or whatever, we can still do something about it. There's a failure in the English-speaking world to listen to Francis, to listen to the Bishop of Rome, to listen to Peter's successor, to listen to that man who has been given these special graces to help us to be open to God's open heart. And I believe, and it'd be interesting for you to watch out for it, he's on the point of actually putting out a new encyclical of how we are to live in the post-COVID world. I know it's not yet post-COVID, but he's preparing us. And I think, you know, and God's heart, and I didn't mention it, is also open to Extinction Rebellion. God's heart is just open. And that's what Francis is trying to teach in so many of his encyclicals. And it will need something in the English-speaking world to inspire that somehow, because we don't have.
Yeah. I really am heartened by the number of people who aren't Catholics who know about what the Pope has been saying. I've got to say that that's really great to sort of see. And I think it is about that original blessing as well, isn't it? Remembering that original blessing. And I was thinking, you know, when you were sort of saying, what do you practically do about this discernment and opening that heart space? I mean, one of the things that has been said to me, or is in sort of like spiritual writings that I've read, is about looking to God, look to Jesus. But more profound than that, I think, is just knowing that God's gaze is on me. You know, just knowing that God's gaze is here with us.
That he is open first, or she, or whatever you want to call him, is open first. That's what you mean by that original blessing.
Yeah.
Wow, what an amazing discussion. And I think I'm aware that our time is up. And